Hey, Hammy here, coming to you in this video with part 3 of section 2 of chapter 1. I just want to wrap up this chapter, talk about a few basic concepts that kind of cover what we will do here this year in biology class. One of the first ideas to cover in this video is that there's an interdependence of living things. Living things depend on each other, and this idea of symbiosis, which many of you have heard before in other science classes, where living things often live together, live in close relationship with one another. We usually split them into 3 different categories. The first one that you see in the picture there with the clownfish and the sea anemone is mutualism. Okay, this is often called a plus relationship because they're both benefiting. The sea anemones have the sting, like the stinging tentacles, which the clownfish are immune to. If any of you have watched Finding Nemo, okay, or Dory, Nemo and his dad can live, the clownfish can live in the sea anemone and not get stung, and that protects them from predators. So they're both benefiting, okay, and they also will help keep parasites and other things that could hurt the sea anemone away from the sea anemone. So they're both benefiting. The next one is commensalism, and I didn't put a picture of this, but you could think of like barnacles on a whale. This is sometimes called a plus zero. So one will benefit. The barnacles have a place to live. They're carried through the ocean to find food, whereas the whale is not really affected by the barnacles on them. So you have a plus minus. And then the last one, the one that we don't like, would be, I'll write it up here, would be parasitism. Okay, or parasites. This is often designated as a plus-minus relationship. Think of a mosquito or tick or a intestinal worm. Okay, they are gaining nutrients from you, and it is a negative to you or to the organism that they are kind of their host that they're feeding on. So these are all symbiotic relationships: mutualism, commensalism, and parasitism. And also when we talk about living things in close contact with each other, we get this idea of competition. Competition between the same species, like here you see these deer, battling it out to, probably over a female, or kind of who gets to be boss or certain territory. Sometimes it's competition between 2 different species and where they might live, or if they have a similar food source. With habitat, or with competition, we're talking about a habitat. Things that they might be competing over: habitat, or a space to live, food source, mates, those kind of things, living space. Those would all be things that living things, as they live together on this planet, that they might be competing for. The next 2 slides kind of give us a picture of really, really small to really, really big, kind of the levels of organization. We have mentioned many times here in the last several videos that living things are made up of cells. That's right. And so when you look at how an organism, living thing, is organized, usually, especially multicellular living things, cells are put together, cells that perform a similar function are put together into a tissue. Okay, so this muscle cell here is put together to form bands of muscle that you would find in an organ, like your stomach, and also other tissues like glandular tissue, muscular tissue, epithelial or covering tissue. So a bunch of different tissues are put together to form an organ. You think of all the organs, like your stomach, mouth, esophagus, small intestine, large intestine. Okay, that would be part of your digestive system. So you see how we're kind of getting more and more complex as we go from simple and we start adding things together. You put all your systems together: digestive, respiratory, cardiovascular, nervous, muscular, skeletal, and the list goes on. Okay, you get the entire organism. So you get this general flow of small to more complex, whether you're looking at plants, animals, and any kind of multicellular organism. When we start with the organism and move up, so here's an individual, here's one goldfish. Okay, then we have the next step would be population of goldfish. So all the goldfish that are living in a certain area, that would be the population of goldfish. When we look at what community the goldfish live in, now that's the other community, includes the other living things around them. Okay, so you have, here's a jellyfish, some other fish, a crab, a bunch of seaweed here, all the living things that would be found kind of in the water in a certain area where that population of goldfish is found. Okay, you throw in the living plus the non-living things, now you have the ecosystem. So you throw in the rocks, notice the water is there now, okay, and maybe the sand across the bottom. Okay, so the environment, the non-living factors that are in that environment, that would be the ecosystem. Okay, major ecosystems across the world are considered biomes. I know you may have studied biomes in the past in other science classes. I know in Bio 2 we take a look at different biomes or big categories of ecosystems that we find throughout our Earth. That layer on our Earth, that layer of living things, remember bio means living, so that sphere or circle of life around the Earth is called the biosphere. So the biosphere would include all of us, all the plants, all the animals, all the living things. Speaking of all the living things, okay, how many different living things are there on Earth? Okay, that is what we call biodiversity, the number of different species that live in a certain area or on the Earth as a whole. There are estimates that there are about 10 million different species on Earth. We don't have all of those classified. We're still discovering, even now today, we're discovering new species in the remote jungles and in remote locations underneath the oceans that have not been classified before. We take all of those living things and we organize them into 6 different kingdoms. The first 2, archaebacteria and bacteria, would be what we call the prokaryotes. Typical bacteria, their DNA is not in a nucleus. They are all single-celled organisms. The other 4, Protista, Animalia, Plantae, and Fungi, are what we call eukaryotes, and their DNA is located within a nucleus inside the cell. We belong in kingdom Animalia. Protista would be like some pond water organisms like amoeba, paramecium, fungi, molds, mushrooms, yeasts, plants, and animals that you're probably pretty familiar with. So we take all that living stuff and kind of classify them into 6 different kingdoms, and we'll get into more into that into a different unit this year.